Live from the city of Melbourne, it's Marcus Pelt Talks, where we make politics a little less boring and a whole lot more local. I'm Marcus Pelt. I'm your host tonight, obviously, and you'll be joined by two co-hosts later in the program, but we're here to talk about the 2025 Prahran by-election. And just when you thought that we were all electioned out with council elections and other by-elections this year and an impending federal election in 2025, stop right there. There's been movement at the station. We've had a resignation in the seat of Prahran, and now we're back off to the polls in this all-important critical seat. So Sam Hibbins was the former Greens member. He has stood down from the party earlier on, and then he ended up actually resigning his position from Parliament, striking the by-election. The VC's gone out and announced that pre-poll will be opening on the 29th of January. We'll have a period before we go back to the polls for this all-important seat. It's a complex seat, and that's why we're here to talk about it tonight, to give you an overview of how this looks. We're going to run a few shows on this, and as always, I want to hear your questions, your tips, your hate mail, everything. Make sure you send it to hello@marcuspel.com or send me a text message or any form of message to 0478 136 762. We'll also take some live calls in the next episode, 1st of January. If you've got any questions, feel free to text them through in terms of audio recordings, as you have done in the past. We are very, very grateful. Let's just have a look at what's happening with this seat and why it is so important. And this paints the picture in terms of why this by-election is so critically important. This is the composition of the Victorian Lower House Parliament. 53 seats are now held by the ALP. It's a thumping majority. There's 88 in total, so you need a 45-seat placement to hold a majority in this House of Parliament and to govern Victoria. The Greens held 4. They're now down to 3 that they've effectively, temporarily, potentially, or permanently, maybe, lost the seat of Prahran. The Liberals hold 19. In coalition with the Nationals, who hold 9, and there's 2 independent members now, independent ALP plus an additional independent, and 2 seats now vacant here, which is the seat of Werribee, following the resignation of the Treasurer, Tim Pallay, and also the resignation of Sam Hibbins, obviously, in Prahran. This is an all-important election, particularly for the Liberal Party. The Labor Party have decided not to run in this election, which is probably a wise tactic on their behalf. But it does leave the field wide open in some respects between the Liberals and the Greens. I'm joined now by our regular co-host, former three-term councillor of the City of Port Phillip and former Liberal candidate, Andrew Bond. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Marcus.
Good to have you back. And Greg Day, who runs the Twist newsletter in St Kilda. He's a St Kilda expert and our resident lefty. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks.
No problem. Gentlemen, let's go through the candidates here. We've got 3 announced candidates. Rachel Westaway is a good friend of mine. She's recently endorsed 3 days in or thereabouts for the Liberal Party. Tony Lupton is the former 2-term member who won the seat in 2002 off Leonie Burke. Sat in there for 2 terms. He's running as independent Labor. You'd probably say, but he's running as an independent candidate because the Labor Party is not running any former seat. Greg, tell us about the Greens candidate quickly.
Well, Angelica, she's their endorsed candidate. She's an engineer by trade, an environmental engineer. She's one of, the people from Green Central Casting who like to run for seats. She's been pre-selected previously for other seats. She'll be an energetic candidate.
Environmental engineer, the former candidate for the seat of Higgins, which was abolished through the federal redistribution also. And Andrew, we've got some breaking news here that we can share with our viewers exclusively. And again, if you're joining us online through Facebook or YouTube, please feel free to make some comments or ask a question, and we'll put those on the screen also. But let's talk about an additional candidate that's just joined the field. Andrew, what do you know about this one?
Very late this afternoon, there's another independent candidate called Matthew Billman has indicated that he's going to run in the state seat of Prahran. He's a former Greens Party member and a former Greens Party candidate at the Oakley 2006 state election the Hotham 2007 federal election, ran for Monash Council in 2008 at the local government elections there, and was another state candidate for Clayton in 2010, but has apparently resigned from the Greens Party a decade or so ago. So he intends to throw his hat in the ring for Prahran. I mean, I would expect there to be more candidates come forward. I expect we'll see people from the Libertarians or Liberal Democrats, as they used to be known, the United Australia Party, maybe Freedom Party, Democratic Labor Party, DLP, Animal Justice, etc. And we may even see a candidate put forward by the St Kilda East branch of Pauline Hanson's One Nation, who feel a Prahran state campaign would be a terrific opportunity to capitalise on a brilliant local government campaign they were telling everyone about.
And Greg, before we move on, have you got any information?
Yeah, we know for sure that the Animal Justice Party will be fielding a candidate. They're doing their pre-selection as we speak, but I don't know what date that's going to be finalised. But they're energetic, shall we put it that way?
And active in the local area.
Great. We'll come back to you in a moment, gentlemen. Let's just continue on with the profile of the seat of Prahran and detailing why this is important. It encompasses the suburbs of South Bank, Melbourne, St Kilda East, Windsor, Prahran and South Yarra. It's inner city. It's 11 square or just over 11 square kilometres. It's been in place since 1889. It's had a rich history, and it's got some key Melbourne landmarks sitting within this seat. It's got the Botanical Gardens, the Shrine of Remembrance Government House, which is iconic. It's got the much unloved Prahran Market, which is finding itself in a lost position at the moment in the red, and much in much need of some love. And it's also got some key high streets on it, being Chapel Street, Toorak Road, Malvern Road High Street, Inkerman Street also, and also the much unloved Carlisle Street. Also needs to have a look at it. But it's also got some key pieces of infrastructure which will be important to note at this election, because they will be election issues. One of those is the Alfred Hospital, which has been dying for redevelopment for some time and many, many years. It's a key piece of infrastructure because it's matched between Cabrini on one side, where the residents from Prahran get their healthcare and emergency situations, particularly people with children, etc., and the Alfred. It has a very key catchment of the seat of Prahran, and it's a much large piece of infrastructure which hasn't been invested in for some time. It's also the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, in terms of the new planning regulations, because this area has some of the highest dense population of anywhere in Australia, and that's only happened in the past 8 or 9 years or so under this Labor government. You've got two highly dense areas which have been built up over the past decade. One is the Albert Road precinct, sub-precinct 2, sub-precinct 3 in the city of Port Phillip, which we'll get to in a moment. On Park Street, Albert Road, St Kilda Road, that area there. Over 7,500 people have moved there in the last 8 years alone. And the second area of high density is along the South Yarra train line, where we've seen that area in the last decade through some poor planning outcomes, really, but also some a large number of new residents moving in there along those areas also. We've also got issues such as public open space in the southeastern side of the seat. Public transport is well filled in this area with 5 train stations either in the seat or just on the adjacency of the street. Pretty much every major tram line in Melbourne runs through this seat. But public transport remains an issue in terms of the Melbourne Metro, which was a big issue in 2014 and again in 2018, bypassing the South Yarra station. And bike lanes remain an issue also, particularly with the City of Port Phillip's decision on Inkerman Street. You're about to get, those of you joining us online, about to get some examples here of just how represented in some cases that your democracy might actually be. These are the results of the last council election and the councillors that are servicing this area in terms of Prahran. We have 8 or 9 directly elected councillors in this area. We got the 4 from the city of Port Phillip that run down here, which were ratepayer winners. So along St Kilda Road, and this area of South Bank was won by what you'd describe as probably more centre-right candidates, which is interesting. The left candidate, so we have Justin Halliday here, which is, I've got a light green because effectively he was backed by a group called Progressive Port Phillip. which competed against the Greens essentially, and the Labor member here, only a small part of the area, but Libby Buckingham won down in this end. Then on the Stonington side, you've got 4 independent, and they range from independent sort of centre-right to mostly left and centre-left on this side, particularly as we move up into the Como ward and even Orong ward to some extent. And it also sits within the city of Melbourne. So this is unique in terms of you've got one state district that sits in 3 local government areas, which is a lot of people with their finger in the pie. But the key themes from the last council elections were that the Greens vote went down pretty much everywhere other than the southeast corner down on the city of Port Phillip side. And none of those councils other than the city of Melbourne that has one has a Green on their council area, which is a big change to what's been happening over the past 10 years. What's also important to note in this area as we have a look at the infrastructure of the seat of Prahran is this is the broader political dynamic that perhaps you should have a look at. There's a lot of people that have a large amount of interest in this seat. The federal seat of Melbourne now overlaps the seat of Prahran. Adam Bant will be critically interested in making sure that the Greens hold the seat of Prahran for his federal election prospects next year. There are 2 upper house members in the Victorian Parliament that have their offices in this seat. David Davis for the Liberal Party moved his office there following Clem Newton-Brown's defeat in 2014, and he's been very active on the ground for 10 odd years, making sure that the Liberal Party still has representation on the ground in the division of, or the district of Prahran rather. It also sits in the federal division of Kooyong, which means Monique Ryan has a small game to play here. But the Labor Party have a fair bit of infrastructure here too. They've got 1 upper house member. They've got the member for Albert Park that's critically involved in this area. And they have Josh Burns, which obviously part of his seat, the seat of Macmara, also sits in the seat of Prahran. And just to top it off, you've got a senator for the Liberal Party that's also based in South Melbourne, just across the road. There's a lot of people who are going to be watching this election, and it's all important, particularly for John Pesciuto, who sits next door in Hawthorn. He'll want to win this because the Liberals will be very unlikely to win government unless they win the seat of Prahran at the 2026 election. And this is a perfect opportunity for them to get a head start on that process. And also David Southwick, who's a great fundraiser and a terrific campaigner, sits in Caulfield just next door also. So this is a crowded space politically, and it's all important for a number of people. This is the history of the seat since 1950. The ALP have been successful in the district of Prahran 7 times, the Liberals 14, and the Greens 3 consecutive elections since 2014. There's some political legends in this seat. Leonie Burke won, Clem Newton-Brown, who only held it for 1 seat, but geez, he wrestled that seat back over a couple of elections for the Liberal Party, and it has a real reputation of chopping and changing. It is centre-left, centre-right. The demographics are always constantly shifting, and if you're going to win this seat, you need to be a member that is ready to work and be the minister for Prahran, because this seat has lots of issues. It's got an active constituency, and you need to be one of the best state members of parliament to make sure you retain this seat going forward. Here is the primary vote. Let's have a look now at the primary vote for the last 3 elections since 2014. As you can see, in 2014, Clem Newton-Brown had a primary vote swing against him of almost, I think, 3%. So he was in the highest 40s when he actually won this seat. He got 45% of the vote. He only just lost the 2014 election, which we'll go through in a moment. But that vote has declined to about 31% at the last election in 2022. The Liberals will need to be in the mid 40s at least to put themselves in a position to win this seat. The Labor Party's gone, largely range bound or sideways over the past 3 elections, 26% in 2014 to now 27% in 2022. The Greens have had an interesting couple of elections, 25%, 2018, 28% primary vote, 2022, 36% of the primary vote where he put himself in a reasonably good position. We'll go through that in more detail in a moment. The minor vote here is moved between 5 and 9%, which is actually quite low considering just how active this vote is. So the 3 main players will be sharing the prizes here. back in 2014, when the seat changed hands from the Liberal Party to the Greens, it was a nail-biting vote. It was 277 votes separating Clem Newton-Brown, the sitting Liberal member, from Sam Hibbins, the Greens. Let's have a look in terms of go back in our time machine and remember just how this vote went and how flukish it actually was. What we had was a situation where the Liberal Party and the ALP came first and second in the primary vote. There was a larger number of independents running, including Steve Stonopoulos, who then went on to become Stonington Mayor. He's a current councillor, just re-elected at the last election. And those preferences flowed predominantly between Clem Newton-Brown and the Greens candidate. It all changed in terms of this voting order: 1 Liberal, 2 Labor, 3 Greens, when the Animal Justice Party preferences were distributed and the Greens candidate, Sam Hibbins, got above the ALP candidate. Then the ALP preferences were distributed, and by the smallest margins, Sam Hibbins for the Green was elected in 2014. The 2018 election saw Dr. Katie Allen represent the Liberal Party in the two-party preferred position in the seat of Prahran, and Sam Hibbins seeking re-election in his first election. He won it reasonably comfortably. That election was difficult, obviously, for the Liberal Party based on a number of issues that were happening at the time, and also a government that was running fairly strong, the ALP. Let's have a look at how those preferences distributed. Again, the Greens came in third position, relying on preferences to get above the ALP again. And it was surprising that the Greens didn't perform better in their primary vote in the 2018 election, but the same thing played out again. Animal Justice Party puts the Greens above the ALP, and they stormed home for victory in that seat. Katie Allen obviously went on the bigger and better things. In some respects, not necessarily, which has just been redistributed out, the last redistribution. At the previous election in 2022, let's have a quick look. The Liberals, Matthew Lucas, came in at 38% two-party preferred versus 62% against Sam Hibbins. This election was a consolidation of the seat in some respects for the Greens. They were able to come into the top 2 position on their primary vote. He topped the primary vote. And as the preferences distributed out, it's much more of a dynamic you would expect to see for a sitting member. The Liberal candidate did pretty well. But again, the Animal Justice Party preferences, the ALP preferences, comfortably put Sam Hibbins ahead of the game. Now, with the ALP not running in this seat, it changes things quite substantially. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in this seat at the by-election. 3 main issues that are brewing in this election at the moment, and we'll talk to our special guests in a moment about the previous election issues. But it's very clear from what I'm saying. I'll be interested to hear what you're talking about, and I'll put some of your comments. Henry, welcome, and Terry also, and Chris, welcome. Thank you for your contributions. Housing's a big issue. Planning is a big issue. Crime is a substantial issue all across the electorate, particularly in the South area with car theft, home break-ins, street violence, and living is a key determinant. So the battlefield here, from an issues point of view, is very firmly on the Liberal Party's side opposed to the Greens. The Greens will be focusing on their constituents around transport and also their focus on renters. I'm going to stop there and we'll run through some more details on this in a moment, but I'll just bring back our special guests and co-hosts Andrew Bond and Greg Day. Greg, what are your thoughts on what you're hearing on the ground about other candidates running, and what are your thoughts about how this election's going to go?
Well, I just want to beg to differ with you on a couple of the factual points. Is the transport issues can be quite interesting, because did you know that in this electorate, although it has lots of trams, there are very few accessible tram stops and not many accessible trams, which is quite an issue. Like in Stonington, there's only 2 accessible tram stops. And when you think of how many trams there are, and also both the South Yarra station and the Windsor station are notoriously hazardous for disabled people. The ramps are too steep. They're death traps, really. I use a wheelchair and it's dead terrifying. So the previous member had been quite active on this. So I presume that'll come up again.
No, fair enough. But I do think the majority of the vote, people sitting there, there's accessibility issue around South Yarra Station, etc. But I really do think that the issues are firmly on the Liberal Party side in terms of.
I don't think it's a vote changer, but it is an issue. It's an issue of neglect that goes to that whole wind out of the detail in the transport infrastructure, which also plays out in the bike lanes as well.
And Andrew, gives you your thoughts on what's going to happen in this election. What are you expecting?
I think Greg's point about the DDA compliant tram stops goes to the issue of just how hard it is to install DDA compliant tram stops across our city. You generally get a lot of pushback from local businesses and some local residents to them, as we saw probably 8 years ago now in Ackland Street when we installed a DDA compliant tram stop there. I know there's been one recently installed outside South Yarra Station, which I presume is one of the two that Greg was referring to, was the only DDA compliant tram stops in the entire city of Stonington. So I'm very surprised to find out there are only two. Look, I think this will be a very interesting election. It's fair to say that all three of the major parties have their challenges right now. The Greens, even though they've grown their vote over the last 3 elections, they've caused this by-election by the resignation of their MP for what we'll politely term behavioural reasons. Generally, in these circumstances, you'll see the incumbent party that causes the by-election get punished by the electorate. The ALP are so on the nose in the state that they are clearly expecting a backlash here and have decided not to run a candidate. So we're looking at a de facto ALP candidate in Tony Lupton. And the Liberals seem to be concerning themselves with internal matters right now, as they've done over the past 2 years. And the latest chapter in that will play out tomorrow. So we'll know a little bit more by tomorrow night on what the mood of the electorate towards the Liberals may very well be. I agree with one of the comments that went up on the screen. The main issue will be cost of living. I think everyone right now is feeling the pinch. Property owners are feeling the pinch from increased interest rates, increased land taxes, increased taxes and compliance requirements on rental properties, increased utility costs, etc. The result is that property owners are either selling up, which decreases supply, or they're increasing the rent on properties they retain, which impacts the renter. This in turn is causing cost of living pressures on the renters who are struggling to find properties to rent and live in, or have no choice but to pay higher rents, which reduces the disposable income available to spend locally, which then impacts local businesses. This whole cost of living cycle of rising costs and decreasing spending going on right now across, it's not just Prahran, but it's the whole state. But this election will be the first opportunity for voters to have their say electorally through the polling booth on what they think of what's happening in our state right now. So it will be a very, very interesting outcome that will be interpreted and watched very closely by all three major political parties.
So, Marcus, what sort of campaigning skills will Rachel Westaway bring to the campaign? We can't hear you, Marcus.
You're on mute.
I think the advantage of a by-election is focus from campaign headquarters. So you get a much greater depth in campaign assistance, campaign expertise, and resources attached to your campaign. So the best and brightest in the Liberal Party will be working on this campaign and down in Werribee. Everyone understands just how important this by-election is. Rachel is a solid performer. She's been around politics a long time. She's been She's been involved in multiple campaigns. She's well presented. She's articulate. She's intelligent. She's a nice, genuine person that goes a long way on a campaign trail. But she will be heavily assisted by the best and brightest in the Liberal Party campaign HQ, and that's a good thing. So they will put up a good show here, and I imagine it will be pretty well resourced also, albeit it's probably early days. The Liberal Party took much longer to get to the field than the other candidates did. The bad news about that is they've lost a bit of traction at a time of the year which is difficult to be campaigning over Christmas, New Year. The good news is Rachel's gone through a competitive process. She's won that competitive process. And I always think when you go through and you have to win a pre-selection to then represent the party at a local level, your messaging's better. You're ready to do battle. You're ready to go. So I think Rachel is the right candidate for the right time at this by-election, and she'll be well-resourced. She'll have the best and brightest around her running a campaign, Greg. I think is the answer to the question.
Well, can I say something? I'd like to say, look, I asked Rachel for her basic bio information on Sunday night and Monday, and I haven't heard back. And, I've heard back from the party office saying that they'll do it, but it's pretty simple information. So,
Yes, I would also say that your weekly publication goes to air on Sunday, so she has time to complete that. So it's not like you're running the Age daily newspaper.
Get on the phone and send that text message, Marcus.
Well, I don't need to, but thanks for that. But it's a fair question. It's an interesting thing, but have a look at the other candidates and the way they'll run their campaigns. The Greens, I didn't put Steph Hodgson's photo on my map there before, but she'll be critically involved in this election. She doesn't have an electoral office at the moment. She sits within East Melbourne in the federal offices there. She lives very close to this seat. She'll be working heavily on the Green side, but these will be two, pretty good campaigns. I imagine the Liberals will lock in their base from the northwestern side of the district. And the Greens will start at the other end. They'll be fighting over the middle ground in this election, but it'll be a hard-fought one. It'll be a good election.
Well, the Greens have an excellent field force in the area, lots of enthusiasm, and do you think the Liberals can match that?
Well, perhaps we'll go to Andrew's the only one on this call that's actually been a Liberal candidate, but I would say to you. Yes, and the reason I'm saying yes is I don't have the slide on me, and perhaps I should have brought it up, but I've always been of the mind that the Liberal Party campaigns best from the brain, but logical issues, the touching people, their jobs, money, the economy, security, crime. The Liberal Party always does well in those areas. The Greens are much more from the heart, social issues, climate change. That's where they sit. The Labor Party voters vote for more from the gut, predominantly focused on health, education, those things. There are voters across all political spectrums that are focused on all of those issues, don't get me wrong. But at the moment, the core focus I'm hearing on the ground in most state seats is things are getting harder, not easier. They're seeing large amounts of government waste at all levels, at their federal government level, at their local council, at their state level. Their wage packets aren't going up enough to meet their cost of living pressures. Their kids' educations aren't where they want to be. There's multiple people under pressure, and the Labor Party has put some infrastructure into the seat of Prahran since 2014 in particular. They put a high school there, which was a very big issue at the election 10 years ago. They've put some things around transport, but if you drive down Dandenong Road and you have a look at the potholes and you see the trees growing in the gutters, you see the traffic congestion around High Street and Malvern Road and around Toorak Road based on the planning decisions that this government has made. And then you drive down Chapel Street, Inkerman Street, Carlisle Street, and have a look at the empty shops. That firmly puts the issues on the side of the Liberal Party. And tactically across the state over the next 18 months to 2 years, they need to be laser focused on those issues and those issues only. And if they do that, they have a very good chance of winning 17 seats and getting to government.
Okay, that's a good speech, Marcus. But one of the other issues is that Prahran, at least on the St Kilda side, doesn't have a very good brand recognition. So, who would have thought that the St Kilda Town Hall is in Prahran.
Yes.
Who would have thought that St Kilda Primary School, which is lobbying for its school hall, was in Prahran? And we've also got the issue of anti-Semitism and Gaza, because the other two big infrastructure things are there are two major synagogues in the electorate. And who would know? Now, the last time the Labor Party candidate ran, I was in a public forum where she was asked a question about Israel, and she didn't understand why it was relevant, because she didn't really take on the bagel belt element of the seat, which is, really divided by the Dandenong Road.
Yeah, the two pieces of Jewish infrastructure that Greg was talking about there, keyly, is there's obviously a Holocaust museum. There's the St Kilda Hebrew congregation, which is one of the most oldest Orthodox shuls in Melbourne, and also the more progressive shul, which is Temple Beth Israel. They're
and the
two.
Melbourne Synagogue on Toorak Road.
Yes, pardon me. You're quite right. I always find it funny during election campaigns when the candidate comes to me and says, my electorate is so special because it's so diverse and so different from every other. And I always say, that's very nice, but it's probably rubbish, because every single seat has idiosyncrasies and it has sub-levels of areas that you need to campaign in. I think this seat has 5 main ones, and I think heavily focused people on the campaign teams will be looking at these 5 areas across the district of Prahran. You've got St Kilda Road there, which is predominantly apartment buildings, higher owner occupancy. For those of you online, this is the area in blue. Higher owner occupancy than your average apartment block. High income levels, and I think it's probably adjacent to the Junction area, which Andrew knows very well. This was Andrew's core constituent base when he was on council, this area here. But this is from the evidence from the council election, albeit probably Mia Street, it's probably more Liberal Green, depending on where you sit. This is probably Jewish population, which needs to be spoken to and needs to be listened to about what their issues are at the moment. There's votes to be won there. Prahran Windsor, again, a completely different campaign there to what you'll be running over on the Port Phillip side. And then South Yarra is, again, completely a different, it's almost 2 different campaigns about the way you run that on the City of Melbourne side versus the City of Stonington side. This is a very, it's a difficult seat on a 50+1 basis to message to, but it is critically important you get that messaging right. And for the first time in 10 years, I think this is like many electorates across the state of Victoria, where people are willing to listen to the Liberal Party. They're looking for an alternative, and their main focus is cost of living, the economy, their jobs and their kids, and it should be theirs for the taking. Andrew, what do you think?
Just to throw a question back at you, Marcus, what happens if the Liberal Party don't win this, given everything appears to be in their favour? The issues will be Liberal issues. The mood in the electorate will be anti-Labor, potentially anti-Green as well, because of the circumstances in which this by-election has come about. Is there going to be potentially a message there if they don't win this seat?
There could well be, but I think what is happening at the moment, we'll go through some polling when we close this off, is it really depends on how close it is. It depends on how well the campaigns roll out. But there's a message in every single election. I think perhaps for this Prahran election is you also now have a competing by-election in Werribee, which probably wasn't foreseen a week or so ago. So look, there's a message in every single election, but I think I'm optimistic that the Liberal Party will get a good result here. Let's not kid ourselves; it's extraordinarily difficult to pull a seat away from the Greens, particularly without the Labor Party running. I think that's actually a net negative, but it is possible. But yes, to your point, there's definitely a lesson in every single election rather.
And the other question is, will the electorate be listening? It's Christmas, you then go into New Year, then half of this electorate heads down to either the Great Ocean Road or the Mornington Peninsula for till about mid-January, and they come back and start work, around the 20th, which is 2 or 3 weeks prior to the election. So will people be listening over this period? Will any message from any party or any candidate be able to get through to the electorate, or will people turn up on election day say, well, I haven't seen or heard anything from you, mostly because it's the wrong time of year to be campaigning and trying to sell a message to anyone?
Well, Marcus, have they confirmed the date to be 8 February, the
Yes.
VEC? You're 100%
Yes,
sure?
well, it is on their website. Yes, so pre-poll opens. Yeah, it's on their website. So just quoting the VC website, the final day for candidate nominations will be the 17th of January. The election day will be Saturday, the 8th of February, 2025. What else we got here? Postal application open at the 23rd of December. Early voting will begin on Wednesday, the 29th of January.
Okay, well, they put out a text message yesterday to voters. So it's, I live in this electorate. The only person in this panel who does. And it said
Yes.
that the election was going to be in early February. They did not say a date. Very
That's interesting. Right, okay. That's interesting.
Because I reckon
that's not inconsistent with the 8th of February being early February.
No, it's not inconsistent. But I would wonder whether they'd be under organisational and political pressure to do both the by-elections on the same day.
As I said, it's just the wrong time of year to be campaigning, and that may be why this date has been chosen by the government of the day, so that any potential impact to them will be minimised, because people won't be listening between now and at least mid-January. So that may be a deliberate decision to hold the election on the 8th of February.
But if you were the government, you would want to do the two by-elections on the same day.
Not if you're not running a candidate in one of them, or you weren't running a candidate in one of them up until this week when the second by-election came about.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I'm only guessing. So,
yes, pretty sure the VEC make the decision independently also. So, yeah, no, it's a good conspiracy to have, though. So, look, we're going to invite the candidates on the program. The two programs at least will run in January. Again, I always say this. I always try to be fair and equal, but I'm completely biased. So if you're looking for an unbiased view, tune in Sky News. I'll tell you about what's happening this election and everything else. That was a joke, by the way. Take everything you hear with a logical grain of salt. But we do try and do our best to run a level kill here. But I'm always happy to get your feedback at hello@marcuspell.com. Any final thoughts before we just have a look at some of the polling data from Redbridge? By the way, Cosmaris has agreed to come on and join us on our January program, so it would be good to hear his insights also. But any final thoughts before we move on to that, Andrew?
Yeah, as I said, I think I agree with some of the comments in the chat that it's all going to be about cost of living, but the challenge is going to be, how do you get your message across at a time when half of this electorate will be down the coast until at least mid-January? It's going to be very difficult to get your message out to the community, and that's the challenge for all 3 or 4 candidates that have announced they're running so far. How do you get people to listen when they completely switch off about now? I know I finish up work tomorrow and I won't be back at work till about the 13th of January. And I think you'll find lots of people will be doing exactly that. And they won't want to be interested or won't be receptive to any political message between now and mid-January. So it's going to be a very, very hard campaign to get your message out there and get your message across.
Oh, and also the Greens aren't rolling in cash. So they're saving their big bucks for the McNamara campaign. So that's a challenge to them. So for example, today I spoke to the socialists, because they like running, but they couldn't spread the resources. They're saving their resources for McNamara. So, the Greens spent big on the council elections as well, which they didn't know this was coming, and they were the biggest party spender in the council elections by far.
Oh, I've seen the electoral donation returns for the City of Port Phillip, which are currently on the City of Port Phillip website, and the Greens spend was well and truly overshadowed by the spend of one of the other parties that ran in that election, who spent close to $80,000.
Well, you're absolutely right, but I did use the word party.
Anyway,
I use the word party
we will
too,
deal with that
Greg.
in another. That's right. We'll deal with that in a future episode. But Greg, any final thoughts here in terms of what you're expecting to see from the candidates or this election before we meet again in January?
Well, I think Tony will be emphasising his connections to the Jewish community and his record on anti-Semitism, and the Greens will be carrying the torch for renters and people entering the property market and the environment together. So it's
well, there you go, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Have a happy Christmas, and thanks again for your hard work this year.
Same to you both, and enjoy your time away, Marcus. Whether it's down the coast or up in the hills, have a great couple of weeks, and you too, Greg.
Thank you.
Cheers. Just before we go, as I said before, it's timely just to have a look at some of the latest polling that we've seen, and this is courtesy of Redbridge and Cosmaris' outfit. The reason I picked this is it's the most recent I could find, but this provides a good snapshot of where the voter sentiment is in Victoria at the moment. And they put this just a sample just under 1,000 thereabouts, so not exactly 100% statistically significant, but geez, it's as good as you can get, particularly as close to this by-election. And it shows that the ALP and Liberal Party are neck and neck on a 2PP basis, albeit this is a small sample size. There's only one survey that counts, and that's and that's one on election day. But as you can see, inner city suburbs, the Liberal Party is actually polling pretty well. But if you combine the Labor Party and Greens vote together, plus probably left-leaning independents, it becomes more troublesome. We need to get that vote much more into the mid-40s to be in a situation where we'll be, in much more closer striking distance come 18 months or 2 years from now. But these are not a bad set of numbers that we sit here also. And I think it's an interesting set of numbers that are heading pretty well in the Liberal Party's direction at the moment if they can, focus on voters and what matters to them the most. So thank you again for joining us. It's been a pleasure to run some of these episodes this year. We'll continue to increase the production value. Again, if you've got a question, you've got a comment, please send it to me. We'll do some live talk back as well next year, but we'll do 2 episodes on the Prahran by-election before the election and get as many candidates and guests on as we can. Have a Merry Christmas, and we wish you and your family all the very best for 2025. Thanks for joining us. See you next year.